There's a fundamental contradiction at the heart of modern China that becomes more glaring with each passing year. The Chinese Communist Party has spent the last 4 decades nurturing a capitalist monster it now struggles to control. A business class that grows wealthier, more sophisticated, and increasingly aware that the very system that enriched them is now the primary obstacle to their future prosperity. This isn't speculation. It's the logical endpoint of a historical pattern we've seen play out repeatedly across the world. Economic liberalization creates winners. Those winners want security for their wealth, and eventually they realize that security requires political power, real political power, not the carefully managed participation the party currently permits. Let me be clear about something up front. I'm approaching this from an unabashedly China hawk perspective. I believe the CCP represents one of the most significant threats to global democratic values and human rights in our era. But this video isn't about what I want to happen. It's about what the internal dynamics of China's political economy suggest will happen, based on historical precedent and basic human nature. China's business elite occupy a strange position. They're phenomenally wealthy. China mints billionaires faster than almost anywhere on Earth. They run companies that compete globally, manage supply chains spanning continents, and make decisions affecting millions of employees. Yet they remain fundamentally powerless. Jack Ma learned this the hard way. In 2020, the founder of Alibaba, a man whose wealth exceeded the GDP of many nations, gave a speech mildly critical of Chinese financial regulators. The response was swift and brutal. His company's IPO was cancelled, he disappeared from public view, and his business empire faced regulatory assault from every direction. The message was unmistakable. You exist at the party's pleasure. This is the gilded cage. Chinese entrepreneurs can accumulate wealth, but they cannot translate that wealth into genuine political power or even basic security. Their assets can be frozen, their companies dismantled, their persons detained, all without meaningful legal recourse. They live under a sort of Damocles that could fall at any moment. Here's the thing about gilded cages. They work for a while. When the economy is booming and everyone's getting richer, most people are willing to accept constraints on their freedom. But when growth slows, when opportunities contract, when the benefits of accepting the status quo diminish, that's when people start rattling the bars. The CCP has made a critical miscalculation. To build a modern economy, they needed modern education. So they sent hundreds of thousands of their brightest students to Western universities. They exposed their future business leaders to ideas about property rights, rule of law, democratic governance, and individual liberty. You can't unring that bell. These aren't peasants who've never known anything but Chinese Communist Party rule. These are MBA graduates from Harvard and Stanford who'd lived in societies where criticizing the government doesn't end your career or your life. They've experienced what it's like to live under genuine rule of law, where contracts are forced predictably and property rights are sacrosanct. More importantly, they've internationalized the connection between these institutions and economic prosperity. They understand, in a way the party desperately hopes they don't, that China's current system is fundamentally inefficient. Political considerations override economic logic constantly. The most capable people don't necessarily rise to positions of authority. Innovation is stifled when it threatens the wrong interests. Capital allocation is distorted by political priorities. This creates a growing cognitive dissonance within the business class. They've been given just enough rope to build empires, but not enough to feel secure in their achievements. They've been educated to understand how modern economies work, then forced to operate in a system that violates these principles daily. Here's the question that keeps Chinese billionaires up at night. How do you protect your wealth in a system without genuine property rights? The answer, increasingly, is you can't. Not really. Sure, you can move money offshore, buy properties in Vancouver or Sydney, secure foreign passports for your children. Many do exactly this, which itself tells you everything about their confidence in the system. But these are defensive measures, acknowledgments of vulnerability rather than solutions. What the business class really needs is something the CCP cannot provide: institutional guarantees. They need a legal system that can constrain government power. They need property rights that no official can arbitrarily revoke. They need political representation that gives them a voice in the decisions affecting their interests. In other words, they need liberalism, not the American left-wing kind, classic liberalism. The ideology of limited government and individual rights that emerged alongside capitalism in the West. The party understands this threat, which is why Xi Jinping has spent his tenure systematically crushing any potential rival power center. Private tutoring companies decimated overnight. The tech sector brought to heel. Real estate tycoons disappeared. Every move designed to remind the business class, you serve at our pleasure. But here's what the party seems to not fully appreciate. Repression has a cost. Every Jack Ma moment alienates not just one billionaire, but hundreds of millionaires watching and thinking, that could be me. Every arbitrary regulation crackdown reminds the business class that their success is contingent, revocable, fundamentally insecure. We've seen this movie before. Chile under Pinochet, South Korea under Park Chung-hee, Taiwan under the KMT, Spain under Franco, authoritarian regimes that liberalized economically while maintaining political control, only to eventually face irresistible pressure for political liberalization. The pattern is consistent. Economic development creates a middle class and a business elite. This class initially tolerates authoritarianism, especially if it delivers growth and stability. But over time, their priorities shift. They become less concerned with getting rich and more concerned with protecting what they have. They develop interests that conflict with political priorities. They chafe under arbitrary power. Eventually, they become the primary constituency for political reform. China's leadership studies history obsessively, which is precisely why they're so paranoid about this dynamic. They saw what happened to the Soviet Union when Gorbachev allowed glasnost. They watched the color revolutions topple authoritarian regimes. They're terrified of becoming the next domino. But paranoia isn't a solution. The same forces that toppled those regimes are building within China. The business class grows larger and more powerful with each passing year. Their interests increasingly diverge from the parties, and their ability to organize, despite surveillance and censorship, grows more sophisticated. Here's an underappreciated factor. Xi Jinping isn't immortal. He's concentrated enormous power in his own hands, dismantling the collective leadership model his predecessors established. This creates a succession problem. Who comes after Xi? How is that transition managed? What happens to all the interests Xi has suppressed? Succession crises are when empires fall. They're moments of vulnerability when previously unthinkable changes become possible. The business class knows this. They're patient. They can wait. And when that moment comes, when the strong hand falters, they'll be positioned to demand concessions, greater legal protections, more political voice, genuine property rights. Each concession will create pressure for more, because you can't partially liberalize political systems any more than you can be partially pregnant. I'm not predicting this happens tomorrow, or even in the next decade. The CCP has shown remarkable adaptability and survival instinct. They have tools of social control that would make Orwell blush. They've successfully created a surveillance state of unprecedented scope. But tools of control are not the same as legitimacy. Fear is not the same as consent, and history suggests that systems built primarily on coercion are inherently unstable, especially as they grow more complex and sophisticated. The business class doesn't need to stage a revolution. They don't need to organize protests or print manifestos. They just need to gradually, persistently, and relentlessly push for the conditions that allow them to operate effectively and protect their interests. Each push creates new precedents. Each precedent becomes a platform for further demands. This is how political transformation happens in the modern era, often not through dramatic revolutions, but through accumulating pressures that eventually overwhelm the system's capacity to manage them. The Chinese Communist Party has created its own gravediggers. They've built a capitalist class that will eventually demand capitalist institutions. The only question is when, not if. And from a China hawk perspective, that day cannot come soon enough. Not because it serves Western interests, but because hundreds of millions of Chinese deserve to live in a system where their rights and property are secure, where they can speak freely, and where political power derives from consent rather than coercion. The business class will overthrow Chinese communism because economic freedom and political tyranny cannot coexist indefinitely. One must give way to the other, and my bet is on the people with the money.